The early morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Street as Harold Matthews adjusted his veteran's cap in front of his bathroom mirror. At 93, his morning routine never changed. His wrinkled hands smoothed down his neatly pressed blue button-down shirt, and his clear blue eyes examined his reflection with the same attention to detail he had learned in the military decades ago. The small house Harold lived in had been his home for the past 50 years. Pictures of his late wife Martha lined the walls, along with black and white photographs from his World War II service. Though he lived alone now, Harold kept everything spotless and organized, just as Martha would have wanted. Every morning at exactly 7:30 a.m., Harold would step out of his front door, wearing his polished brown shoes and carrying his wooden cane. The cane, a gift from his son Tom, was more of a companion than a necessity. Harold's posture remained remarkably straight for his age, a testament to his military bearing and lifetime of staying active. The walk to Joe's Diner was exactly 4 blocks, and Harold enjoyed every step of it. He would stop to smell Mrs. Anderson's roses that hung over her white picket fence, wave to the newspaper boy Tommy who reminded him of himself at that age, and pause to watch the school buses beginning their morning routes. The regulars at Joe's Diner had come to expect Harold's arrival at 7:45 a.m. sharp. The bell above the door would chime, and without fail, Harold would remove his cap, tuck it under his arm, and greet Sally, the waitress, with a warm good morning, young lady. Sally, who had been serving him breakfast for the past 15 years, would already have his usual order ready to go: 2 eggs over easy, whole wheat toast, a small bowl of oatmeal, and black coffee. Harold always sat at the same booth, the third one from the window. From there, he could watch the town wake up while enjoying his breakfast. He would carefully unfold his paper napkin onto his lap, just as he had done in the mess halls during the war. The other customers had grown used to his presence, and many would stop by his table to say hello or ask about his service stories. On this particular morning, Harold noticed something different about his usual spot. The leather of the booth seat had been repaired, and a small brass plaque had been added to the wall above it. He adjusted his reading glasses to make out the words, "Harold's Corner, reserved for our favorite veteran." The gesture brought a warm smile to his weathered face. As he ate his breakfast, Harold's mind wandered to the memories of his younger days. He thought about the friends he had made during the war, the love story with Martha that began with a chance meeting at a USO dance, and the life they had built together in this small town. Though many of his contemporaries had passed on or moved to retirement homes, Harold remained fiercely independent. What most people didn't know about Harold was that beneath his gentle exterior lay the heart of a warrior. After the war, he had spent years training in judo, eventually earning his black belt. He had even taught self-defense classes at the local community center well into his 70s. The wooden cane he carried had been more for appearance than necessity, a fact that would soon surprise many people. As he finished his coffee, Harold noticed a group of motorcycles rumbling into the parking lot. Their loud engines disrupted the usual morning peace, but he simply continued his routine, leaving his usual generous tip for Sally and standing up with the same dignity he showed in everything he did. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Matthews," Sally called out as he made his way to the door. "Lord willing and the creek don't rise," Harold replied with a wink, using one of Martha's favorite sayings. As he stepped outside into the now fully risen sun, Harold could feel the eyes of the bikers on him. They were newcomers to the town, and something about their presence made him uneasy. Still, he nodded politely in their direction, just as he did to everyone he met. Little did anyone know that this simple morning routine was about to become the beginning of an extraordinary story that would change not only Harold's life, but the lives of everyone in the small town of Pine Grove. The peaceful mornings at Joe's Diner changed the day the Black Ravens Motorcycle Club decided to make the strip mall parking lot their new hangout spot. Led by their leader, Mike the Snake Thompson, a muscular man in his 30s with tattoo-covered arms, the group of 8 bikers brought with them an air of trouble that made the regular customers uncomfortable. For 3 days straight, Harold observed their presence from his usual booth. The bikers would arrive just as he was finishing his breakfast, their loud motorcycles drowning out the usual morning chatter. They would spread themselves across several parking spaces, their bikes forming a semicircle near the diner's entrance. On this particular morning, as Harold prepared to leave, he could hear their conversations through the open diner window. "Look at that old-timer," one of them snickered. "Bet he fought in the Civil War." The comment was followed by rough laughter that made Sally, The waitress frowned as she refilled Harold's coffee cup. "Don't let them bother you, Mr. Matthews," Sally whispered, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. But Harold just smiled, his blue eyes twinkling with the same courage that had carried him through the beaches of Normandy. As Harold stepped outside, Mike deliberately stretched out his legs, blocking part of the sidewalk. The old veteran had to carefully maneuver around him, using his cane for balance. "Sorry, Gramps," Mike said with fake politeness, making no effort to move. "Didn't see you there with all that dust coming off your antique uniform." The other bikers laughed, but Harold noticed one of them, a younger man named Tommy, looking uncomfortable with his friend's behavior. The boy reminded Harold of his own grandson, perhaps led astray by the wrong crowd. Later that afternoon, Harold sat in his living room, looking through an old photo album. His fingers traced over a picture of himself in his military uniform, standing proud with his fellow soldiers. Next to it was a newer photograph of him teaching a judo class 15 years ago. He might have retired from teaching, but he hadn't forgotten a single technique. The next morning, the bikers arrived earlier than usual. As Harold approached the diner, they had already positioned themselves near the entrance. Two of them were sitting on their bikes, revving their engines unnecessarily, while others leaned against the wall, watching him with amused expressions. "Hey, look who it is," Mike called out loudly. "The last survivor of the Revolutionary War." More laughter followed as Harold approached the entrance. This time, three of them formed a loose circle around him, not exactly threatening, but definitely intimidating. "Nice cane you got there, old-timer," one of them said, reaching out to tap it with his boot. "What's it made of? Dinosaur bones?" Harold remained silent, his face calm but his eyes alert. He could feel his heart beating steady and strong, just as it had during combat situations decades ago. The training he had received both in the military and in the dojo had taught him to stay calm under pressure. Inside the diner, regular customers watched through the windows with concern. Sally had already picked up the phone, her finger hovering over the numbers to call the police. But Harold gave her a subtle shake of his head through the window. He had handled worse situations in his life. As he finally made his way inside, Harold could hear Mike saying to his friends, "Tomorrow, let's show Grandpa here some real entertainment." The threat was clear in his voice, but it didn't shake Harold's composure. Taking his usual seat, Harold noticed young Tommy, the uncomfortable-looking biker, watching him through the window. Their eyes met briefly, and Tommy quickly looked away, shame evident on his face. "Would you like me to call the police, Mr. Matthews?" Sally asked as she brought his usual breakfast. "Those men are nothing but trouble." Harold shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "Sometimes, Sally," he said quietly, "people need to learn their lessons in unexpected ways." He picked up his coffee cup with a steady hand, his mind already forming a plan. Tomorrow would indeed bring some entertainment, but perhaps not the kind the bikers were expecting. As he ate his breakfast, Harold began mentally reviewing the judo moves he had practiced for so many years. He might be in his 90s, but some things you never forget, like how to handle bullies who underestimate an old man. The next few weeks brought a noticeable change to the peaceful mornings in Pine Grove. The Black Ravens had made it their mission to turn Harold's daily walk to the diner into an obstacle course. Each day, their harassment grew bolder, and the town's residents watched with increasing concern. On this particular morning, Harold stood at his front door, looking at Martha's picture hanging in the hallway. "Might need your strength today, dear," he whispered, touching the frame gently before stepping out into the crisp morning air. As he turned the corner onto Main Street, he could already hear the rumble of motorcycles. The bikers had figured out his route and now positioned themselves at different points along his path. Today, they had parked their bikes across the sidewalk, forcing Harold to walk on the street around them. "Watch out for cars, Grandpa," Mike shouted, his voice carrying a mocking tone. "Wouldn't want you to have an accident." The other bikers laughed, except for young Tommy, who stayed at the back of the group, looking increasingly uncomfortable with each passing day. Harold kept walking, his back straight and his steps steady. He faced German artillery in World War II. These youngsters didn't frighten him. Still, he noticed his grip tightening on his wooden cane, not from fear, but from growing determination. Inside the diner, the regular customers had started taking sides near the window, ready to step in if things got out of hand. Sally had begun serving Harold's breakfast a little earlier each day, hoping he could finish before the bikers arrived. But the Black Ravens had adjusted their schedule too, showing up earlier and earlier. "Mr. Matthews," Sally said as she poured his coffee, her voice low and worried, "my brother's a police officer. One word from you, and he'll take care of these troublemakers." Harold smiled at her concern. "Sometimes, Sally, best way to stop a bully isn't through force, but through a lesson they'll never forget." His eyes twinkled with a hint of the plan forming in his mind. Outside, the bikers had grown bolder. They started playing a new game, taking turns walking behind Harold, mimicking his gait in exaggerated ways. Mike even borrowed a stick from behind the diner to use as a fake cane, drawing laughs from his gang. "Look at me, I fought in the Civil War." Mike strutted around, hunched over the stick. "No, wait, maybe it was the War of 1812. More laughter followed, but Harold noticed it was becoming forced. Several of the bikers seemed less enthusiastic about tormenting an elderly veteran. That afternoon, Harold spent time in his basement, where he had set up a small workout area years ago. Despite his age, he still maintained his strength through daily exercises. He went through some basic judo movements, his muscles remembering the forms perfectly. His body might be older, but 90 years had given him something his young tormentors lacked: patience and wisdom. The next morning brought dark clouds and a threat of rain. Harold put on his old military raincoat, the same one he'd kept carefully preserved since the war. As he walked toward the diner, the bikers were already waiting, undeterred by the weather. This time, they formed a complete circle around him, moving slowly as he walked, like sharks circling their prey. Mike stepped closer, his leather jacket gleaming with raindrops. "Hey, old-timer, maybe it's time you found a new breakfast spot. This place is getting a little too lively for someone your age." The threat in his voice was clear. Other pedestrians crossed the street to avoid the confrontation, and someone inside the diner was urgently making a phone call. But Harold simply kept walking, his face calm, though his eyes had taken on the sharp focus of a warrior assessing his opponents. Young Tommy suddenly spoke up, his voice shaky but determined. "Maybe we should lay off Mike. He's just trying to have his breakfast." "Shut up, Tommy," Mike snapped. "Tomorrow, we're going to show Gramps here what happens when he doesn't take a hint. Better bring your A-game, old man." As Harold finally entered the diner, he could feel everyone's eyes on him. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. But for the first time in weeks, a small smile played across his lips. Tomorrow would indeed be different, but not in the way Mike and his gang expected. Little did the Black Ravens know, they were about to learn why you should never judge a book by its cover, or a veteran by his age. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Harold woke up at his usual time, 6:30 a.m., and went through his morning routine. But today, he spent an extra moment looking at his old military photograph and his black belt hanging next to it. Something in his gut told him this wouldn't be an ordinary day. As he stepped outside, the air felt different. Maybe it was the way the morning sun cast long shadows across his path, or perhaps it was the unusual quiet that hung over Pine Grove. Even the birds seemed to sense the coming storm. Harold had left his house 10 minutes earlier than usual, his wooden cane tapping softly against the sidewalk. He caught his reflection in a store window, an old man in a veteran's cap, but his eyes told a different story. They were sharp, alert, and ready. The Black Ravens were already waiting. This time, they had brought more friends. 12 motorcycles lined the parking lot instead of the usual 8. Mike stood in the center, wearing a new leather vest with their club logo, looking like a schoolyard bully who had gathered his entire gang for a final showdown. Well, Mike called out, his voice carrying across the nearly empty parking lot. "Look who's early today, boys. Our favorite ancient warrior." The other bikers formed a tight circle, completely surrounding Harold. This time, there was no easy way to walk around them. Inside Joe's diner, customers pressed against the windows. Sally stood by the phone, ready to call the police. Even the cook, Big Joe himself, had come out from behind the grill to watch, a heavy spatula gripped in his hand. "You know," Mike said, stepping closer to Harold, "we've been really patient with you, old-timer. But this is our territory now." He reached out and flicked Harold's veteran's cap. "Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to have your morning coffee." The other bikers moved in closer, their boots scraping against the asphalt. Young Tommy stood at the back, his face pale with worry. "Mike, come on," he started to say, but a sharp look from his leader silenced him. Harold remained perfectly still, his blue eyes scanning the circle of men around him. His right hand held his cane firmly, but not tightly, just as he had held his rifle all those years ago, ready but relaxed. "What's wrong, Gramps? Cat got your tongue?" Mike reached out again, this time to poke Harold's chest. "Maybe we need to speak a little louder for those old ears to hear." The crowd watching from the diner had grown larger. Someone had called the police, and in the distance, a siren could be heard. But Harold knew this had to end here and now. With deliberate slowness, Harold took off his veteran's cap and handed it to young Tommy, who took it automatically, surprise written across his face. Then, Harold removed his jacket, folding it carefully and placing it on a nearby bench. "Young man," Harold spoke for the first time, his voice clear and strong, carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in battle. "I've been patient with your disrespect. I tolerated your mockery. I had hoped you would learn manners on your own." Mike laughed, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Something about the old man's calm demeanor had changed. He didn't look so old anymore. He stood straight and confident, his movements smooth and purposeful. "But it seems," Harold continued, carefully placing his cane against the bench, "that some lessons need to be taught the hard way." The circle of bikers had gone quiet. Even Mike took a small step back, confused by this unexpected turn of events. The old man they had been mocking suddenly seemed different, taller, stronger, more imposing. "Last chance, boys," Harold said quietly, assuming a subtle stance that only a trained eye would recognize as a judo-ready position. "You can either leave now and come back tomorrow with better manners, or you can learn why the greatest generation earned its name." Mike's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. "Get him," he shouted, stepping forward with his fist raised. What happened next would become a legend in Pine Grove, a story that would be told and retold for years to come. The breaking point had been reached, and Harold Matthews, 93-year-old World War II veteran, was about to show these young troublemakers why you should never judge an old warrior by his age. Time seemed to slow down as Mike charged forward, his fist aimed at the old veteran. The crowd at the diner's window held their breath. Sally covered her eyes, unable to watch. But what happened next left everyone speechless. Harold moved with the grace of a dancer and the precision of a master. As Mike's punch came toward him, Harold simply wasn't there anymore. In one fluid motion, the 93-year-old veteran stepped to the side, gripped Mike's extended arm, and used the biker's own momentum against him. The next thing anyone knew, Mike was flying through the air. His tough guy expression turned to pure surprise as he sailed over Harold's hip, guided by the older man's expert technique. The biker leader landed flat on his back, the impact knocking all the air from his lungs. "That, young man," Harold said calmly, returning to his ready stance, "was a basic hip throw. One of the first moves I taught to American soldiers after the war." His voice carried across the now silent parking lot. Gone was any trace of an elderly shuffle. Harold stood tall, his movements precise and controlled. Two more bikers rushed forward, thinking they could overwhelm the old man. Harold dealt with them just as efficiently. The first one found himself gently but firmly deposited on the ground with a foot sweep, while the second was left sitting on the asphalt, wondering how he got there after a perfectly executed shoulder throw. In 1948, Harold continued, not even breathing hard, "I earned my black belt in judo. Spent 30 years teaching it to police officers and military personnel." He adjusted his stance slightly, ready for any more challengers. Would anyone else like a demonstration? The remaining bikers backed away, their faces showing a mixture of shock and respect. Young Tommy stood with his mouth open, still holding Harold's veteran cap like it was a precious treasure. Mike struggled to his feet, his leather jacket scuffed and his pride hurt more than his body. You're some kind of ninja," he gasped, still trying to catch his breath. Harold chuckled. "No, son, I'm just an old veteran who believes in staying prepared." He looked around at the group of bikers. "I also believe in respect, discipline, and using strength to protect, not to bully." From inside the diner came the sound of applause. The customers were cheering, with Sally jumping up and down in excitement. Even Big Joe was nodding in approval, a broad smile on his face. "The techniques I used," Harold explained, his voice taking on a teacher's tone, "are designed to subdue without causing serious harm. In judo, we learn to use an opponent's own strength against them. It's not about being tough or violent. It's about balance, wisdom, and respect. Young Tommy stepped forward, carefully holding out Harold's cap. "Mr. Matthews," he said, his voice filled with awe, Would you be willing to teach us?" The request caught everyone by surprise, especially Mike, who was still dusting himself off. Harold looked at the young man thoughtfully, seeing the genuine interest in his eyes. "Judo isn't just about throwing people around," Harold said, taking his cap back. "It's about building character, showing respect, and knowing when to use strength and when to show mercy." He looked directly at Mike. "Are you interested in learning those lessons?" Mike, still rubbing his back, looked at the old veteran with new eyes. The tough guy act had vanished, replaced by something that looked like embarrassment and maybe a hint of respect. "I may be 93, Harold continued, picking up his cane and jacket, "but age is just a number. What matters is how you use the time you have to better yourself and help others." The police siren, which had been getting closer, was now just around the corner. Harold straightened his clothing and put his cap back on, once again looking like the gentle old veteran everyone knew. But now they all saw him differently, not as an easy target, but as a master who had been hiding in plain sight. "Now then," Harold said, his eyes twinkling, "who would like to join me for breakfast? I think we all have a lot to talk about." He turned toward the diner, leaving behind a group of thoroughly humble bikers who had just learned one of life's most important lessons. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book is a decorated veteran with a black belt in judo. The police car pulled into the parking lot just as Harold was holding the diner door open for Mike and Tommy. Officer Dan Parker, who had grown up in Pine Grove, stepped out of his vehicle expecting trouble but instead found a scene he'd never forget. The feared Black Ravens motorcycle gang was lined up quietly, waiting to enter Joe's diner like schoolchildren on a field trip. Their usual tough expressions were replaced with looks of amazement and respect. Some were still rubbing sore spots where they had met the pavement, but none showed any anger. "Everything all right here, Mr. Matthews?" Officer Parker asked, confused by the unusual sight. Just minutes ago, they had received multiple worried calls about the bikers surrounding the old veteran. "Never better, Danny," Harold replied with a smile. "These dumb men and I just had a rather enlightening discussion about respect and martial arts." He gestured to the scuff marks on the pavement. "Though I'm afraid we may have left some marks on your nice parking lot." Inside the diner, Sally was rushing around, pushing tables together to accommodate the unexpected group. The regular customers watched in amazement as Harold sat down at his usual spot, now surrounded by the very bikers who had been tormenting him minutes before. "So, Mr. Matthews," Mike began, his usual swagger replaced by genuine curiosity, "you said you taught judo to soldiers? Was this after World War I?" His leather jacket was still dusty from his unexpected flight, but his eyes showed sincere interest. Harold nodded, taking a sip of his coffee that Sally had quickly refilled. "Started teaching in 1948. The military had seen how effective martial arts could be during the war, especially in close combat situations. They wanted instructors who could combine military experience with martial arts knowledge." The other bikers leaned in, forgetting about their coffees and the plates of eggs that Sally was bringing out. Even the regular customers had gone quiet, listening to every word. "That throw you used on me," Mike said, still seeming amazed. "It didn't even hurt. I mean, I flew through the air, but the landing was almost gentle." Harold's eyes twinkled. "That's the beauty of judo. It's not about causing pain or injury. It's about using your opponent's energy and momentum. The word judo itself means the gentle way." Young Tommy, who had taken the seat directly across from Harold, couldn't contain his excitement. "Could you show us more? I mean, not right now, but could you teach us?" The old veteran looked around the table at the eager faces. These weren't the same arrogant troublemakers from earlier. The demonstration had cracked their tough exterior, revealing curious young men who perhaps had never had a proper mentor in their lives. "Learning judo isn't just about physical techniques," Harold explained, cutting into his usual breakfast of eggs and toast. "It's about developing character, discipline, and respect. Are you all willing to commit to that?" One by one, the bikers nodded. Even Mike, who had been the leader of their harassment campaign, showed genuine enthusiasm. "Yes, sir," he said, the "sir" coming naturally now. "We'd be honored to learn from you." Officer Parker, who had come inside to check on the situation, stood by the counter shaking his head in amazement. In 15 years of police work, he'd never seen anything quite like this, a 93-year-old veteran turning a group of troublemakers into respectful students over breakfast. "Well then," Harold said, finishing his coffee, "we can start tomorrow morning. Instead of blocking the sidewalk, you can meet me at the community center at 7 a.m. We'll begin with the basics, including how to fall properly." He gave Mike a knowing look, which made the biker leader grin despite himself. As the unusual breakfast meeting continued, people passing by the diner stopped to stare through the windows. The sight of Harold Matthews, decorated veteran and secret judo master, sharing a meal on wisdom with the Black Ravens would become part of Pine Grove's history. But more than that, it was the beginning of a transformation, not just for the bikers, but for the whole town. They were witnessing firsthand how skill combined with wisdom could bridge generations, turn enemies into students, and change lives without throwing a single punch. Just another morning in Pine Grove, the one that no one would ever forget. By sunset of that remarkable day, the story of Harold Matthews and the Black Ravens had spread through Pine Grove like wildfire. Mrs. Anderson, who lived across from Joe's diner, had captured the entire morning's events on her phone. Within hours, the video of a 93-year-old veteran teaching young bikers a lesson in respect had gone viral on social media. Local news vans parked outside Harold's modest home, but the old veteran wasn't there to comment. He was busy at the community center, preparing for tomorrow's first judo class. The same room where he had taught decades ago was being cleaned and readied, with new mats being delivered thanks to a quick donation from Mayor Thompson. "Did you see the video?" People asked each other in shops and on streets. The way he moved, like someone half his age. The clip showed Harold's perfect hip throw, followed by the heartwarming scene of the bikers joining him for breakfast. It had already reached millions of views and was being shared by veterans groups across the country. At the Black Ravens' usual gathering spot, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Mike stood before his fellow bikers, his leather vest now clean of parking lot dust. "Starting tomorrow, we're changing things," he announced to the group. "No more harassment, no more bullying. We're better than that." Young Tommy had spent the afternoon researching judo and Harold's military service. He discovered that their new teacher had received multiple medals for bravery in World War II. "Guys, do you realize who's going to be teaching us?" he told the others excitedly. "He's not just any veteran, he's a real hero." Inside Joe's diner, Sally had put up a new sign above Harold's regular booth. It read, "Reserved for Harold Matthews, veteran, teacher, local hero." Bay Joe had decided to offer free coffee to any veteran who came in wearing a judo gi, his way of supporting Harold's new class. The police station was buzzing with conversation too. Officer Parker had filed his report about the morning's incident, titled simply, "Community Dispute Resolved Through Peaceful Demonstration of Martial Arts Skills." His fellow officers couldn't stop watching the video, amazed at how Harold had diffused the situation without causing any injuries. That evening, Harold sat in his living room, looking at Martha's picture. "You'd be proud, dear," he said softly. "Those boys aren't bad kids. They just needed someone to show them a better way." His phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from old students, fellow veterans, and even a few morning talk shows requesting interviews. At the local high school, the guidance counselor had already asked Harold about starting a youth program. "These kids need role models," she explained during her call. "Someone to teach them about respect and discipline." Harold had agreed to think about it, though his focus was on his newest students first. The community center's phone lines were jammed with people wanting to join Harold's class. The director had to start a waiting list, giving priority to the Black Ravens members who had promised to attend. "It's not just about learning judo," the director explained to eager callers. "It's about learning life lessons from someone who has lived them." Mike, still feeling the effects of his morning flight, spent the evening practicing bows in front of his mirror. His younger sister caught him and giggled, but then she saw the serious look in his eyes. "I'm going to make it right," he told her. "Mr. Matthews is giving us a chance to be better people." Around town, parents told their children the story of Harold Matthews, not just about his morning victory, but about the wisdom of waiting for the right moment to reveal one's strength. The tale would become a local legend, teaching kids that true power lies not in intimidation, but in how you choose to use your abilities to help others. As night fell over Pine Grove, Harold laid out his old judo gi, carefully folding the black belt he hadn't worn in years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he was ready. At 93, he had found a new purpose, not just teaching martial arts, but helping to bridge the gap between generations and showing that it's never too late to make a difference in someone's life. The viral video might have made him famous, but for Harold, the real reward would come tomorrow morning, when you would have the chance to transform former troublemakers into students of the gentle way. 6 months had passed since the morning that changed Pine Grove forever. The community center was alive with activity as Harold Matthews, now known affectionately as Sensei Harold, watched his students practice their judo throws. The Black Ravens, once feared troublemakers, had transformed into something entirely different. Mike, wearing a newly earned green belt, carefully demonstrated a throw technique to a group of teenagers. His leather jacket, hanging on a hook nearby, now bore a new patch. Black Ravens Community Service Club, Strength Through Service. The gang had transformed into a volunteer organization, with Harold as their honorary leader. Remember, Mike called out to his students, echoing Harold's teachings, "It's not about strength, it's about balance and respect." The same voice that once mocked an elderly veteran now carried the wisdom of someone who had learned life's important lessons. Young Tommy, showing promise as an instructor himself, helped younger kids learn to fall safely. The community center had to expand its program to accommodate all the people who wanted to learn from Harold and his first group of students. What started as one morning class had grown into a full day of sessions for different age groups. The Black Ravens motorcycles still lined the parking lot, but now they carried food donations for the local shelter or building materials for community projects. Every Saturday, the group helped elderly residents with home repairs and yard work. The same strength that once intimidated now served to lift, help, and support. Harold still walked to Joe's diner every morning, but he was rarely alone. Different members of the Black Ravens would join him, eager to hear stories about his military service or learn more about judo's philosophical principles. The diner had become a place where different generations came together, sharing meals and wisdom. "You see, boys," Harold would say during these breakfast meetings, "the true measure of strength isn't in how many people you can push around. It's in how many people you can lift up." His students would nod, understanding now what real power meant. The viral video of Harold's demonstration had led to unexpected opportunities. Veterans groups from neighboring towns asked him to speak about conflict resolution. Schools invited him to talk about respect and bullying prevention. But Harold's pride lay in the change he saw in his first students. Mike had started a mentoring program for troubled teens, using his own story as an example of how people could change. "If someone had shown me this path earlier," he often said, "maybe I wouldn't have wasted so many years trying to prove myself through intimidation." The community center's walls now displayed photos of Harold in his younger days teaching judo, alongside new pictures of him with the Black Ravens. Children would point at these images, amazed that their gentle teacher had once been a soldier and that the helpful bikers had once been troublemakers. One morning, as Harold supervised practice, a reporter asked him about his secret to changing the Black Ravens. "There was no secret," he replied with a smile. "Sometimes people just need someone to believe in them and show them a better way. These boys always had good hearts, they just needed help finding them." The town of Pine Grove had changed too. The story of Harold and the Black Ravens had inspired other communities to start similar programs. The mayor had declared an annual Community Unity Day, celebrating the power of understanding and second chances. On Harold's 94th birthday, the Black Ravens organized a surprise party at Joe's diner. The entire town seemed to show up. Among the gifts was a custom-made walking cane, crafted by Mike himself, with the words, "Strength, Wisdom, Honor," engraved on its handle. As Harold looked around at the gathering, he saw not just students or former troublemakers, but family. The Black Ravens had become the sons and grandsons he never had, each one carrying forward his lessons of respect, discipline, and using strength to help others. "Martha would have loved this," he whispered to himself, touching the wedding ring he still wore. His wife had always believed in helping others find their way, and now he was continuing that legacy. The story of the 93-year-old veteran who transformed a biker gang through judo became more than just a viral video. It became a lesson about how it's never too late to make a difference, never too late to change, and never too late to learn that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in helping them rise. Harold Matthews had not just taught judo, He had shown an entire community the power of wisdom, respect, and the gentle way.